Marco Vicenzino is the director of the Global Strategy Project. He joins us now from New York. The real key thing, it seems, here is the role of the military in Venezuela. Do you think that there's any way the army will swing completely behind Juan Guaido?
The situation right now in Venezuela, you have Guaido clearly has the support of has popular support since assuming the interim presidency according and invoking the Venezuelan constitution in January. It's been over a 3-month process, and he's clearly secured popular support. He's secured the necessary diplomatic support within the Americas and within leading European countries, let's say within the Western world. But in terms of the military, that's where it's been the sticking point. I would say right now the military remains fragmented, mostly, to a certain extent, I would say, according to generational fault lines and the fault lines according to rank. I think Guaido has support amongst particularly the younger officers, the younger members of the security and military establishment. But as you go up and you go further up the military hierarchy, the level of support, I would say, becomes uncertain, because obviously there's those who are either they are directly associated with the regime, particularly if you're looking at the top military brass, others who have no plan B if this regime ends, others who are just ideologically committed to this regime. So I would say as you go up the military hierarchy, once again, that level of support, it becomes uncertain. Many don't know exactly which way to go. And obviously, you also have the Cuban element. The Cuban element, what I mean by that is that the Cubans have infiltrated the security military establishment over a period of 20 years. And they're effective, very, very effective. And in terms of helping Maduro maintain that military support and their ability to conduct surveillance amongst the military and political establishment is very, very effective. So you take into consideration all these factors, and also you take into consideration the fact that you have Russian help, particularly on the technical front, in assisting the regime. So despite the popular support for Guaido, despite the diplomatic support from the Western world, you still have that major question mark within military ranks. And obviously, ultimately, the future of Venezuela will be determined and be determined by those who have the bullets, and less so by those who possess the number of ballots.
Well, we're getting to a key point here, because the U.S. has obviously been very involved in this crisis from the beginning, to the point where some critics from the camp of Nicolas Maduro, from Russia, are accusing Juan Guaido of just being a U.S. puppet. Do you think there's any truth to that?
No, I mean, I disagree with that completely, man. If you look at the level of support that he's achieved, and also much of his support is not just because of the popular support. It's been a period of years since Nicolas Maduro assumed presidency in 2013. And the election by which he won that first time around was also very questionable. And you look at the level of just the 2018 presidential election, which I think most would agree that was conducted on fraudulent basis. He's lost all legitimacy. The economy has collapsed by over 50%. There's been blackouts in the cities. People don't even have the basic supplies, whether it's food, medical supplies. This is a country that has the largest natural reserves of oil in the world, and to see it reduced to the status that it wasn't due to the United States, and it wasn't due to any external power. It was due to its economic mismanagement, rampant corruption, and basically the Maduro regime, as I've said in the past, is what the seeds that were planted by Chavez years ago, starting in 1998, Nicolas Maduro is sowing today. This is completely self-inflicted by this regime. It has nothing to do with outside sources.
But what about U.S. involvement? What about U.S. involvement as a whole? The U.S. was one of the, if I can just jump in here for a minute, the U.S. was one of the first to send international relief aid. It's obviously very invested in Venezuela. Why is the U.S. so invested in the country, to the point of saying that the option of military intervention could still be on the table?
For a number of years before recognizing the Guaido government, for 20 years, the U.S. was buying the majority of Venezuelan oil. So many have even accused the U.S. in the past of aiding and abetting the Chavista regime by buying Venezuelan oil over the years. So it's the U.S., I would say, it's had a vested interest in importing Venezuelan oil, and the Venezuelan regime has had an interest in exporting that oil. It was a mutually beneficial relationship for years. Now, you get to a point where there's over 3 million refugees that have left Venezuela as a result, which destabilizes the region as a whole, the Western Hemisphere, hence the major support of all the major Latin American countries, including the Colombia and Brazil. Colombia alone has over 1 million. Some would even argue 1.5 million refugees of Venezuela. So when you have this spillover of Venezuela's domestic problems into the rest of the hemisphere, it becomes a hemispheric problem. It becomes a responsibility of Venezuela's neighbors, its regional neighbors, and of the international community also. Hence the support of many leading European nations. Once again, this is not, we're not dealing with a situation where there's where Guaido is a puppet of the United States or of the Western world. This is a self-inflicted situation by the Maduro regime and 20 years of Chavista rule of the Bolivarian Revolution. And basically now this spillover has taken place to a point where the outside powers, the regional neighbors, have to take action, whether it's diplomatic action, economic sanctions. You just cannot let this situation go on and on. It's an international responsibility. It's been taken to the seat of the United Nations, and obviously at the Security Council, much of the decision-making is done. China and Russia are heavily invested. So I would get your question, I'd flip it back to you, and I'd say the Maduro regime has actually become a puppet of Chinese and Russian interests, whereby they've invested so much into the regime, whereby the Maduro regime today is actually serving the interests of Russia and China, who protect the current regime and are currently exploiting all the natural resources of Venezuela to their advantage, which a government that is completely corrupt, has been condemned internationally as corrupt, and has mismanaged the economy. So once again, your question about Guaido being a puppet of the United States, I'd flip that back. I'd say to you is that Maduro has become a puppet of the Cubans, a puppet of the Russians, and a puppet of the Chinese, and to the detriment of ordinary Venezuelans. The economic situations and the economic reality speak for itself. There's nothing I can really add to that. And once again, the situation speaks for itself.
Marco, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. Marco Vicenzino, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Marco Vicenzino, the director of the Global Strategy Project in New York.